Welcome to the Leading Towards Justice series, the first in our series. And we are super excited to be with all of you and to be with our guests today. Today is the first of a monthly series. It's going to run until June, and it's co-sponsored by the Corbally Fund, Leadership for Learning Program, the Danforth Program, and the Just Ed Leadership Institute, all at the University of Washington's College of Education. I am Anne Ishimura. I'm Associate Professor of Educational Foundations, Leadership and Policy, the Director of the new Just Ed Leadership Institute.
Sheikh Clowett, good evening. I'm Anthony Craig, the Director of Leadership for Learning in the College of Education, and happy to be here with you all and our co-planners.
So we wanted to thank you for taking time out of your busy afternoon and to join us during this moment to orient or reorient our visions toward justice and the educational and community leadership that those require. We're very excited to be in space today with some incredible leaders, thinkers, artists, and change makers. And we're going to be talking about Willful Defiance, the new book that Dr. Mark Warren wrote with the People's Think Tank about the movement to disrupt the school to prison pipeline. And we're also going to be joined by and learning from Sierra Parsons and Zion Thomas from WABLOC, leaders from Washington Building Leaders of Change, and Jonathan Stith, who is the coordinator of the Alliance for Educational Justice and co-director of the National Campaign for Police-Free Schools. Before we jump in, we want to say a couple of words about how we hope to be in space with you all today. So first, we want to acknowledge that wherever we are on Indigenous lands, wherever we're Zooming from or physically at. And here in the College of Ed in particular, we're on lands of the Coast Salish people, and recognize that they've stewarded these lands, waters, and lifeways since time immemorial, and are still doing so. And so I'm very grateful for the original leadership and indebted to the wisdom and relations that they extend to those of us who, like me, are settlers on this land and uninvited settlers on these territories. So even as we recognize the devastating toll that settler colonialism has wrought and the role that schools in particular have brought to Indigenous families and communities and tribes. So we think a lot about that in all of the leadership programs in the College of Ed, and think about not just remembering and acknowledging through statements like these, but also having a kind of responsibility to think about and to enact work towards sovereignty and to lead in ways that are in solidarity with Indigenous lands and peoples.
Yeah, with the risk of repeating Anne, I myself am a citizen of the Yakama Nation, a tribe in Central Washington, what's now known as Central Washington. I'm also a descendant of Suquamish and Puyallup and have been living in the Tulalip tribes community for over 20 years. This is our reminder to ourselves and everyone else that in order to truly bring justice to these Indigenous territories, it takes work. It will be much more than a slide or an acknowledgement or a statement. And we really aim to make sure that this series, tonight's session, and all of our work truly contributes to justice for everyone who lives in these Indigenous lands. Second, we want to acknowledge the time that we're in. So the cumulative effect of everything that's going on in the world brings many feelings, fatigue, and the realities that we have to remember to breathe and breathe collective breaths. So thank you all for being here. And as we hold each other up, remember to breathe through all of this powerful, beautiful work and everywhere you go throughout these territories.
Thanks. So lastly, we want to say this is not going to be your typical sit and get series. So when Sierra, Mark, and Anthony and I got together and we started planning for today, we were very clear that we didn't want this to be a kind of another boring Zoom webinar that you just sit and listen to, because the leadership of Black and Brown youth isn't about being passive. It's not about getting lectured. I was thinking about the scholar Dave Stovall, and I'd heard him reflecting on his learning and growth over the past few years. He talked about the necessity of joy in organizing and the work of youth, and that youth leadership is about music, it's about movement, it's about speaking truth to power, it's about resistance and creativity and making change with their feet, their bodies, their souls, their brilliance, and their joy. So you're going to get a little taste of that hopefully today, and we want to invite you all into community.
As a reminder, this recording will be available to all those who have registered. We have closed captioning available. You need to click on the box to access that. Message us in the chat if you're unable to do that or unsure. We'll be sharing links to the chat, to the full video, to the spoken word at the end, where you can get your own copy of the book, get in touch with the organizations that will be mentioned today. And we really hope that as one measure of interaction, you use the Q&A feature throughout, but for certain close to the end of the segment so we can get to those questions. So don't forget to be interactive tonight.
And so I'm gonna introduce Sarah in just a minute, she's gonna introduce us to a music video that we're gonna get to watch. But as you're watching, we want to invite you to participate in the chat and to answer the question that's put in the chat there. Why does youth leadership matter? So drop your thoughts in as you're watching this video. I'd like to do a brief introduction for Sierra Parsons from Woblock. She's going to give us a little framing for the video we're about to see. Sierra Parsons is a community organizer who works and lives in Southeast Seattle, and she helps to lead Woblock. Sierra is passionate about Black joy, grassroots social action, and transformative education, and she is also obsessed with mac and cheese. Sierra.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that intro. Hey, y'all. We're going to watch a portion of the Nona Youth Jail Anthem that was written, produced, and filmed by young freedom fighters participating in Woblock's 2018 Summer Freedom Schools at Rainier Beach High School. This filming took place on August 10th for our Day of Social Action in protest of the $210 million invested to build the new youth detention center in Seattle. At this time, the walls of the detention center had gone up, but the construction site was still only a shell of a building, and students wanted to use this day to reimagine what could go inside and where that funding could have been redirected to support healing in our community.
To the folks who are currently locked up, I would say have hope. Have hope because some people are in the mindset that they are stuck up in this path and that they can't change and turn into something positive. And they feel this way because of how people treat them. Instead of jail cells, in this building could go resources for families, could be something that help the youth. To the people who are building this jail, I would say educate yourselves. Educate yourselves on how this is having an effect on people. It's feeding the school to prison pipeline. Finally, I would just say have hope and support us youth. Support us because sometimes we need to know that there's someone there for us and we can be positive and do things that are good.
What's your name?
Yo, Botch.
Where you from?
South.
We don't need a new and flawed incarceration. Let it be replaced with youth education. Instead of us wasting this county's compensation, put it to good use for students' prosperation. Gotta keep check on school's administration. Make sure fairness don't lead to miscorrection. Spare oneself from adding to occupation. Gonna let them be bright with great positive connection.
Here in the world, this jail makes me feel uneasy. They think that this life is just easy peasy. Let me squeeze, they don't care about our feelings. Take a guess, we are stressed, thinking that we are next. The new triple X, the one who's up next. I'm gonna change this community. Lyrically, musically, physically, spiritually, brutally, mentally, peacefully. Now I pass the mic to my boy, Real Be Free.
Down said we need a jail. He ain't never spent a night in a cell. What the hell? So why is he the one to tell? A black male that lack bail to catch hell. Down said we need a jail. He ain't never spent a night in a cell. Man, what the hell? So why is he the one to tell? A black male that lack bail to catch hell.
Tell Dow he can meet us in the South End. You won't listen, so don't run your mouth in. Keep it up, we gon' take it to the streets. Freedom schools, we live from Rainier Beach. Freedom schools, we live from Rainier Beach. Freedom schools, we live from Rainier Beach.
You good, you good.
All right. Woo! That's fire. So we're gonna send you the link so that you can watch the whole thing. There's a whole music video there that I would encourage you all to check out. We're gonna just for the rest of the schedule today, we're gonna hear a little bit from Dr. Mark Warren about Willful Defiance, the book, and the research that he did around that. We're going to we'll hear about some of the local organizing that's been happening, and Sarah and Zion are going to come and talk more about that. And then we get to think about how the local is connected to the national. As Joyce Parker says in the book, there is no national without the local. And so then we'll shift and we'll hear from Jonathan Stiff as well, who is, as I mentioned, who is part of the Alliance for Educational Justice. And then we'll come back together and we'll have some conversation with each other. So I want to encourage you to be putting questions in the Q&A function. And please do feel free to continue to populate the chat because I see a few people putting some things out there. I want to encourage everybody to jump in and what are some ideas about why youth leadership matters? I see talking about early empowerment and really thinking about the future and the ways in which youth leaders bring perspectives that we might not get from older leadership. So I want to just encourage you to put those in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and introduce the author of the book today. Dr. Mark R. Warren is a professor of public policy and public affairs at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. He's a sociologist and a community engaged scholar who studies and works with community, parent, and youth organizing groups seeking to promote equity and justice in education, community development, and American democratic life. He's also the dad to two incredible young adults, husband to Bobby, a kindergarten teacher in public schools. And many of you may know already, he's also was my doctoral advisor who led and cultivated a community of engaged scholars that he continues to mentor to really expand those networks of love and liberation. So I'm very excited and honored to have the opportunity to have him share some of his work here with community and colleagues here in Seattle and Washington. Mark.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Anne and Anthony and everybody at UW that has invited me and us here today to talk about the movement to dismantle the school-to-prison pipeline. I'm glad to be here with Jonathan Stiff, one of my very close partners in the research that we use to produce the book and in the community engagement and work that we're trying to do to figure out ways to use a book like this to help support and build a movement to continue to end zero tolerance school discipline and remove police from schools. And it was exciting to see that video because what we saw in the video is the kinds of things that I've been studying with my partners and writing about in this book. So let me just start by saying the title of the book, Willful Defiance, was really meant to be in some ways a play on words because you may or may not know that hundreds of thousands of students are being suspended from school every year for something called willful defiance. Sometimes it's called disrupting school or willful disruption. And it's a very subjective category. It can mean having your hat on backwards or not refusing to take it off, or it could mean challenging the history textbooks in your school because they've been published in Texas, and is that really the history that's relevant to our lives? And so we have hundreds of thousands of students being suspended for that every year, and it was part of the rise of this kind of exclusionary discipline and policing practices that started and it was in full swing by the 1990s. In response to that, however, almost from the very beginning, though, Black and brown parents and young people began to challenge the school to prison pipeline and willfully defy a system that was really designed to punish and control and criminalize Black and brown young people and their families. And this book is really the story of that movement and an analysis of how that movement organized locally and connected up nationally to really make incredible gains against school discipline policies and some newer gains to actually defund and remove police from schools. As one example, in Los Angeles, through many years of organizing, a coalition of youth organizing groups supported by parent and community groups won a change in the school discipline policy in Los Angeles in 2013 to ban suspensions for willful defiance. And as a result, before that ban, there were about 75,000 lost days of instruction due to suspensions in Los Angeles, and that number went down from 75,000 to 5,600 over the course of 7 or 8 years. So this is an example, I think, of the important gains that this movement has made and is continuing to make despite the continued depth of the school to prison pipeline and systemic racism in our schools. I want to take a few moments. I'm only going to speak for a few minutes because this is, as the book is, it's about a collaboration. It's about bringing diverse voices and participation to the table and engaging with each other, connecting up locally to nationally and across our local areas, which is really the theme of the book. Local organizing is no longer strong enough to defeat entrenched systems of white supremacy in our schools. We need deep local organizing supported by a national movement and national organizations like the Alliance for Educational Justice or the Dignity in Schools campaign, which is the largest coalition of organizing and advocacy groups working to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. In any case, let me make a few points. First of all, in this book, I document and demonstrate the absolute central importance of building a movement with people who are most impacted by injustice at the center, students of color and their parents and families. Their voices really fill this book. And I think it's important to realize that the first people to name and challenge the school to prison pipeline were not academics like myself. They were not professional advocates or civil rights advocates based in Washington. They were not educators. The first people to name and challenge the school to prison pipeline were Black and brown parents and young people who themselves were the direct victims of that system. And I start the book in the mid-1990s in Holmes County, Mississippi, in the heart of the Mississippi Delta in the old plantation system, where a group of Black African-American parents and young people and organizers were some of the very first to name and challenge the school to prison pipeline. They called it the schoolhouse to jailhouse track, which was the more common term that young people and parents used at that time. But they had a number of different experiences. One of the famous cases was a group of students, Black students were on a bus throwing popcorn at each other. The popcorn hit the back of the head of the white school bus driver. She drove the bus straight to the police station, and 7 African-American boys were arrested and charged with criminal assault for throwing popcorn at a school bus driver. There was an organizing campaign to drop those charges, but in the end, the students ended up so-called dropping out of school or leaving school because they were banned from riding on the bus and couldn't get to school. And so this was some of the early examples that drew the direct connection between discipline and policing practices in and around schools and the juvenile and criminal justice system. So first is the vital role that parents and young people have played in starting the movement and giving it its energy and organizing to win the kinds of changes that have happened in Los Angeles and places across the country. The second is the really important role of community organizing that is youth-led and parent-led to challenge these systems of punishment and criminalization. And the book really goes into detail about what are all the real components that are involved in building strong and successful organizing groups that are led by young people and parents. Political education, leadership development, skills building, relationship building, protest tactics, and policy development, participatory research. We saw a year and a half ago the power of mass protests to bring issues to light and to change the discourse and the agenda. But few people really know that most of the places that won the defunding or removal of police from schools were places where young people and parents have been, young people in particular, but parents also have been leading organizing campaigns for police-free schools for maybe almost up to 10 years in places like with the Black Organizing Project in Oakland and other parts of the country. So these protests were really important, but they were successful in actually changing policy and practice when they were rooted in and connected to long-term youth-led and parent-led organizing campaigns. As Ann said, one of the quotes in the book is that there is no national without the local, but also the critical importance of a national movement to really bring resources to bear, resources like research, like organizing training, like the connections that really inspire people to act in local areas. So the importance of the emergence of a national movement, and that's something that's actually pretty new in this more recent world of community organizing around educational justice. Anne was part of a project that we worked with at Harvard. It produced a book called The Match on Dry Grass. In that book, we documented 6 organizing groups across the country, and we almost drew a box around them as local organizing campaigns in and of themselves in their local areas. And that was true largely of the movement in the early and mid 2000s. But things have really changed. And with the school to prison pipeline movement, we see the emergence of these connections across localities and the formation of powerful national movements. But the book really tries to argue, how do we create a movement that isn't dominated by professional advocates who have more money, more expertise, more connections? How do you build a movement that is really rooted in and accountable to local organizing that's working directly with people who are most impacted? And that is really one of the key lessons of this movement, and is a lesson I think that needs to be taken up, not just by the educational justice movement, by social justice movements of all kinds across the country. It was a struggle. It was a power struggle to create a movement like this, which, I try to tell that story. The fourth point is, this is a complex movement. Movements are complex. And as the movement grew and developed, it grew as an intergenerational and intersectional movement. And there were struggles around that. How do you create a movement that can feature and lift up and center the voices of trans and queer youth, or of Black girls in the school to prison pipeline, without at the same time being competitive to or undermining a focus on the particular experiences of Black and brown boys in the school to prison pipeline? How do you have a movement that centers anti-Black racism, but includes a whole range of people who have experience and are leading campaigns against suspensions and expulsions and for police-free schools? And finally, the book really tries to wrestle with the development of really authentic alternatives, because you can change policies, but how do you go deeply into schools to really transform the culture and practice of teaching and learning, the climate at schools? Because the reality is, we focus on exclusionary discipline like suspensions and expulsion, and we focus on policing in schools. But what is causing and feeding the school to prison pipeline is the whole range of ways that our public education is undermining young people and their families and their communities of color. Underfunding of schools, culturally irrelevant curriculum, and focused on standardized and rote-based teaching. All of these things contribute to it. And so how do we really work to really transform what's going on in our schools, not just bringing in outside consultants who can teach people about restorative justice circles, but really do deep school by school based organizing to transform the hearts and minds of our educators and bring them into alliance with a movement that is centered in parents and young people. With the pandemic, I think we've seen how deeply broken our system is of public education, how rooted in white supremacy it is, and how it really works to reproduce the racial and economic order. So I really hope that the book and the movement that it represents contributes to a transformative process where the discussion and the movement to dismantle the school to prison pipeline is an entry point for a wholesale transformation of our schools towards racial equity and educational justice, where education can serve as a force for freedom and liberation of people and the building of power and an authentic agency in our communities. In the book, I lift up strategies and successes, and I hope that if you read this book or if you learn from people on the program today, that you will not just learn, but it will move you to act in your schools and in your communities. We all have a responsibility to dismantle the school to prison pipeline and transform our public education system towards racial equity and educational justice. And I hope that this book helps spur you to take up that call and to act in the ways that you can in your own schools and communities. So thank you very much. I look forward to the conversation that we're going to have today. This is not a book about dead history. It's a book about living history, and we're going to be hearing from some of those folks who are carrying on and building upon the tradition and continuing to organize in their communities. So I'd like to turn it over now to Sierra, please.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'll probably say a number of the things you said already, just in a different way. And again, my name is Sierra. I'm here representing WABLOC, and I'm also with my friend Zion Thomas, who is a Rainier Beach High School and Freedom Schools alumni, a community organizer, photographer, and a leader at Rainier Beach Action Coalition. For those of you who don't know, WABLOC is a grassroots organization that is rooted in the Rainier Beach neighborhood in Southeast Seattle. Our mission is to build and nurture intergenerational leaders through transformative education and revolutionary social action. Some of our work includes our annual Summer Freedom Schools, which is a 6-week high-impact literacy and social action-based summer program for Black and Brown youth. We know that revolution means creating, so this is a critical time for us to nurture a Black imagination. We also partner with the Southeast Seattle Public Schools to implement restorative and transformative justice, and we focus on elevating youth voice and supporting youth-led social action. Over the years, WABLOC has organized alongside youth in the Rainier Beach neighborhood in Southeast Seattle to challenge and disrupt the school to prison pipeline. In 2015, inaugural Freedom School scholars at Rainier Beach High School organized and marched to protest against the 2.5-mile walk zone policy, marching from the John Stanford Center to City Hall, launching a multi-year campaign ultimately leading to the Youth Orca Card program, which provides free Orca cards for middle and high school students. The walk zone policy was also reduced to 1 mile, so now 24,000 Seattle Public School students have access to free transportation. In 2018, Rainier Beach High School Freedom School scholars wrote, produced, and filmed the No New Youth Jail Anthem. You all had a chance to watch a little bit of that video earlier. And again, I encourage you all to revisit it and watch its length in full. Following years of continued community pressure, in July of 2020, Dow Constantine announced plans to close the youth jail by 2025, and we will definitely press the issue if that isn't the case. In 2020, WABLOC partnered with youth-led activist group Black Minds Matter and Feast Seattle to apply pressure to the Seattle School Board to remove school resource officers from schools. And as a result, they indefinitely ended their relationship with the Seattle Police Department. One of our ongoing organizing efforts is definitely implementing restorative justice in schools, because we know that even with police being removed from schools, white supremacy and carceral logic in schools are still harming Black and Brown students. One of our ongoing, we know that this is a way we can help to dismantle the school to prison pipeline, implementing restorative justice. Because it empowers communities to respond holistically to violence and harm without police and prisons. With the national movement to transform school discipline, as Mark was speaking to, the implementation of restorative justice is being rushed, it's being watered down, it's causing harm, and it's tainting the reputation of restorative and transformative practices in schools. The integrity of restorative justice lies in the peacemaking principles. 2 of these are to build trust and relationships before arriving at conclusions and solutions, and to work on self, not to change others. And this takes more time than we may realize in a school community. In addition to restorative justice, students are currently organizing for increased COVID safety measures in their schools, access to things like universal testing and masks. I'll drop the link in the chat so y'all can support the Seattle Public School student demands. Last time I checked, it was like 10 signatures away from their goal of 1,500. So if it's not already there, maybe y'all can help to push it there. They're also demanding more mental health support and resources, more school funding, and a robust ethnic studies curriculum. Over the years working with WABLOC, I've learned to trust that students know how they're being impacted and can organize and mobilize for change. I've also learned to lean into the power of intergenerational leadership and wisdom sharing. During my first year at WABLOC as a Freedom School servant leader educator, I learned that students have just as much to teach us. It was sitting in circle with a classroom of middle school scholars, listening to and hearing their experiences, that I came to understand how reciprocal learning could and should be. And with that, I'll now go ahead and pass it off to my friend Zion Thomas, who I also got to meet and learn alongside during that 2018 Freedom School summer. Zion, it's all you.
Hi, everybody. My time over with WABLOC and even at my time here at Learning Based Action Coalition has been really interesting because we've actually been very instrumental in really being able to use restorative justice directly in community. And I feel like what's happened is we've been able to really humanize our students and our young folks in our community and be able to talk to them in ways that instills empathy, in ways that instills love and protection and real listening skills, instead of being able to actually cause harm through the same systems and through the same lenses that we often use through educational institutions. And I feel like just being able to humanize these same young Black boys, young Black girls, and so many other young folks in community has gone such a long way because we're able to see them as whole. And I feel like even sometimes in the school system and growing up in systems like Rainier Beach High School, it was very challenging to feel whole or to feel really welcomed by the school system, because at large, Rainier Beach High School was so underfunded and so neglected to the point where it's taken over 60 years for Rainier Beach High School to even be renovated after nearly every other school, I mean, actually high school in our city has been renovated constantly. So I feel like also with Rainier Beach High School in particular, a lot of our, maybe you could say, awareness of our treatment has been very aware and privy to how Rainier Beach High School has been treated, kind of as like a cautionary tale for a lot of other bodies in the South End, as a representation of how we are often treated and neglected, and sometimes even abused by the system and by school systems and by the city system. To come up with like a quick example for everybody, over at Rainier Beach Action Coalition, what we do is we recognize that there are 5 hotspots in the Rainier Beach neighborhood. Hotspots being places where youth crime are very prevalent. And what we do is, instead of using the same punitive systems or lenses to impact young folks in that neighborhood, what we do is we actually directly engage with those hotspots to de-escalate and promote positivity in the neighborhood. And what we've noticed that is, in our over 6 years of being directly in community in these spaces, in these youth crime hotspots, our presence there at peak times of youth crime has significantly gone down. And what we also do in these hotspots where youth crime is prevalent is we also hold healing circles. We also are passing our resources. We also are giving folks the time to be loved and seen. And I feel like because of that, that's why there has been such a dip in youth crime activity in these areas, to the point where it's little to none anymore. And I think that's also a testament to when you're able to provide young folks, whether it be in school, whether it be in community and other places, when you're able to provide resources that directly impact young folks in community, there's drastic change that happens because, I mean, their needs are being met. And what happens when your needs aren't met in community is it can cause conflict, it can cause tension, and so much more harm to come. So in the restorative sense of being able to rebuild and create empathy and create pathways for healing, it's no longer about being able to punish young folks because they don't have resources. It's about being able to restore that healing. It's about being able to create dialogue with that healing to build something new, so that this happens no more. And that there's also a formal accountability process. And I think lastly, I'll just speak on accountability really quick. I feel like oftentimes when we talk about accountability, especially for young folks, whether it be in community or in the school system, it is also very punitive and very condescending for young folks. And I feel like accountability sometimes can get more geared towards that than what I believe community is, which is being able to have trust. And I feel like there's an organizer that I know that said there's three C's come with accountability. It's consent, compassion, and community. And that you can't have accountability without those 3 C's. And what you need is for consent for young folks to be able to be honest. You need compassion to be able to relate to each other. And you need community. Because oftentimes when young folks are being held accountable within the school system, it's being done by folks that they don't know. It's being done by folks who people have no communal relationships with, and therefore it's just very awkward to build or transform healing or any sort of behaviors. And that also extends towards faculty. Sometimes accountability can be very one-sided, that it's only for young folks and not for faculty, not for staff, not for principals, and et cetera. So also, when we're able to create real trust and real community between folks, there is an accountability process where folks understand each other, folks are able to be honest with each other and be able to transform harm into healing and transform that into, just something better for community. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Zion and Sierra. So powerful. I hope you guys get a chance to take a look at the chat. I think folks are really inspired and moved by all that you have shared. I want to introduce Jonathan Stith to be able to kind of help us think about the power of the local organizing that's happening in other communities, and also think about that as part of the national work that Mark talked about. Jonathan Stith is the National Coordinator for the Alliance for Educational Justice and the co-director of the National Campaign for Police-Free Schools. He's a key leader in the movement. He's featured, you'll see him prominently in the book, and we're so honored and delighted that he's joining us today. Jonathan, would you share with us a little bit about what you hear in Seattle in our region that resonates with what's happening elsewhere in the country and at the national level?
Absolutely. Excited to be here and to really listen and to learn from the work that was happening in Seattle as we were organizing for in the moment kind of after the the murder of George Floyd, and we saw kind of the uprising of young folk all over the country demanding the end of policing from their schools. Seattle was one of the cities that we were paying attention to, that we were cheering on, and that we were drawing strength and inspiration from as we watched. And so I'm just really honored just to see and to meet some of those beautiful minds and be in community. And I think one of the things we want to say is, welcome to the struggle for police-free schools. And as we've been hearing from Sierra and Zion, that the winning of police-free schools is the beginning of struggle, not its end. Schools won't be transformed with the ending of policing. So we heard from Sierra that this kind of policing remains. And so when we talk about police-free schools, we're talking about dismantling school policing infrastructure, culture, and practice, ending school militarization and surveillance. And most importantly, what I heard a lot from Zion this building of a new liberatory education. And oftentimes people ask us, you know, what about this and what about this and what about safety, and who is to do this? And our answer is to listen to young folk. And part of one of our presentations at the beginning was following young people to police-free schools, that we believe that young people do have the answers to safety, particularly Black and brown youth have an answer to what keeps them safe. And oftentimes it's not policing, it's the things that we heard about: connection, belonging, helping to meet needs, new schools, right? And so we see a connection between all of those. And for many of us, we arrive at our kind of position through these years of organizing. I think the second thing I'll draw upon is that the connection between schools and communities, and that part of one of the central theses of the organizing that was happening was that the transformation that removing police from schools was a seed to removing them from our communities, and that we understood, as Assata Shakur teaches us, that schools reflect the societies that they come from, and that we started to theorize that perhaps maybe if we could change schools, we had a lever and some leverage to change society, and who better to lead that change than young folks. So again, a lot of the solutions around what's ailing young people in this particular moment, the call for mental health is not a new call, right? It has always been a call. And as we've seen in so many school districts and across the country, the response, even now under COVID, is more policing to what we're understanding is happening and with schools. And so again, understanding this connection between community and schools and community, and how do we transform one to transform the other. And then I think the last piece, I think the question around restorative justice is the right question to be asked. I think that's one of the things that we're seeing across the country, and one of the hurdles that we're kind of wrestling with now in this moment, that folks have won policing, and there's a need to come with the alternative, and the alternative being restorative justice as we see it, or some form of transformative justice. But now there's a history of that being used and weaponized against students of color and Black students in their own schools. And so there's a real challenge there in terms of what are the sets of alternative systems to be built while understanding what's happening as schools are reopening under COVID. And there's again a connection between the kind of material conditions of schools and its connection to reflecting and being like the jails, right? And oftentimes when I was a community organizer in DC, we would often hear, after winning the closing of a youth jail in DC, we're still organizing to try to change facilities, we would hear from young people who were coming back from that facility that the facilities, the jail, was in better condition than the community schools that they were returning to. And so that set us into really thinking about that dynamic. So, and then I think one of the things that we're seeing again and understanding the issue of policing is then looking at the sets of strategies that continue to need to be built out even after ending what we call dismantling. And these are what we call the 6 Ds. And these come from studying youth organizing. And as Mark talked about, many of the groups that make up the Alliance and the National Campaign have been organizing for police-free schools for many years. Shout out to the Black Organizing Project, who was one of the leaders in the campaign. And really, we're drawing lessons from each other and kind of bringing them and building them together into what we call this national strategy, these 6 Ds. And one is, how do you deprioritize policing in schools, right? This idea that in some cities like Oakland, they were calling the police 6,000 times a year on students, Black students, right? How do you come up with calling the police an instrument of last resort? We all are familiar with defunding, right? How do we shift the resources away from policing and reinvest them in Black students? I think looking at the amazing work in Los Angeles is a great example of that, and the money being redirected back to Black students towards their achievement. The third one is decriminalize, looking at the sets of laws that make it possible for police to be called and young people to be criminalized right in their classrooms. The genesis of our work is in the assault at Spring Valley with Nia Kinney and Shakara, where Shakara was criminalized and had the police called on her and ultimately choked and slammed and thrown across the room for allegedly refusing to give up her cell phone, and that Nia Kinney was then also charged with felony disturbing education for trying to intervene and stop the abuse of a school police officer. The third one is kind of demilitarized. How do we look at understanding what's happening with school surveillance, metal detectors, and measures that just frankly don't work, and what we've seen with schools going online and Black students getting the police called on them and getting charged with crimes for having a toy gun in their room during class, right? And so looking at those, the way schools practice that as part of their infrastructure, culture, and practice. And then the last one is delegitimize, right? We have to create a new narrative around policing, and we see it playing out in this current moment as schools are in crisis, and we're seeing school districts kind of reverse course and go back to policing as they're being met with pressure and breakdowns, and then return there. So that's why it's so important for us when we talk about police-free schools to really emphasize is about ending policing infrastructure, culture, and practice, and that is the path, and that is a long road to struggle and to victory. But that's why we do with young youth organizers, because they're young.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jonathan. I want to invite Mark and Sierra and Zion to come back and join us. And I want to invite folks to start putting your questions in the Q&A. I'm going to kind of get us started with a couple of questions. And I'm hoping we can just kind of have some conversation rather than I call on you kind of format here. Jonathan, I wanted to kind of pick up where you left off, this idea of like, we're in this moment of the pandemic, and there's a way in which all kinds of things have shifted. And at the same time, we've got similar dynamics playing out. You give the example of during remote learning, sending police to a kid who's got a toy gun online. And then we have young people walking out of schools like in real time right now about the kinds of things that Sierra and Zion were talking about with safety. And so I wonder if you all might just speak to that a little bit more about like, what do you see like in this moment? How are all these dynamics unfolding? And are there things that we are seeing unfold in terms of the strategies, the leadership and the organizing that are happening on the ground that are specific to this moment? Who wants to jump in? Sierra, you want to jump in first?
I mean, I think somebody said it earlier, like these issues are so complex. Or I guess how our schools are being impacted right now are so complex. Like students are trying to transition back in person, educators are trying to transition back in person, everyone's trying to stay healthy, and then also like feeling pressured to implement restorative justice really perfectly, even though there's all these restrictions around like social distancing. Folks can't sit in circle right now, so educators are trying to navigate adapting their classrooms to be more restorative and navigate public safety and health. So that has presented a challenge. And I think some of the demands that came up in June of 2020, like those have kind of been put on hold to focus on COVID safety right now. So there's been I've noticed a little bit of shift in focus for community organizing in Southeast Seattle specifically.
I'll add a somewhat different perspective on it. I think that, well, Jonathan and I just wrote a blog piece about this, looking at what we call the white lash, that like understanding the pushback against the police-free schools movement is really part of a larger effort that has to do with trying to stop the teaching of, well, what's called a critical race theory, but actually any curriculum that tries to reveal the racist history of the United States. And so I bring this up because I think that, we have to understand that the school to prison pipeline is not an isolated thing. It's really part of the rise of what Michelle Alexander called the new Jim Crow, the mass criminalization of particularly African-American, but also Latinx communities and to some extent indigenous communities that happened in response to the gains of the civil rights movement. And so, one of the arguments we make in the book is not well understood, that, you know, mass incarceration begins in school. That you know, many young people had their first interaction with police in schools. They're arrested in schools. Black children have 25%, by the age of 14, 25% of all Black children have a parent who has been in prison at one point in their lives. So it's really about an intergenerational system. And so if we understand it that way, then we can look at the contemporary moment and say, well, there were these gains. There was a push forward of the school to prison pipeline movement. There was the ending of zero tolerance, really. And now the beginning of defunding and remove police in schools. And there's a backlash against that. And the COVID era is part of that, but it's really an orchestrated movement to try to stop some of these gains, because these gains are working not just to end something discrete in a school, but a part of a larger system that is really pushing forward an anti-racist agenda in this country.
That kind of relates to a question I see in the chat, especially for Jonathan, around the patterns you've seen with the work for police-free schools. Do you see those patterns? And how have you seen the responses?
The pendulum swing, huh? Yeah, I mean, our answer has been that what we've noticed is that cities that had, again, like a strong organizing base and were prepared to really go the long path to organize. Again, when we were dreaming and building towards the Police Free Schools campaign, we imagined a 10-year struggle that was ahead of us. This was also coming out of, this starts under the DeVos administration, right? So we're like, what are we gonna do, right? And so we really saw this as a 10-year project, had a long-term arc to it. And so what we've seen is in communities that organize and kind of had a long run up are ones that are continue to build pressure. So again, I invite folks to really look at the Black organizing projects, organizing their people's plan. Again, they were in the process. I think one of the things they did very smartly was to involve community in beginning to build the alternative, as well as winning power in this particular school district to be able to implement the decisions that they were making or that they were winning. I think that's been also a critical piece of keeping the victory. Same in places like Denver, right? Kind of these long histories of organizing it. And so I think that has been what we've seen some of the differences been. And then I think where we've seen the reversal have been kind of where places where school boards just kind of, I don't know what got into them, but they just all started ending their contracts. There's like 130 of them. There's only 30 cities in the campaign at the time. They just started kind of handing themselves over and ending the policing, but had no real thought about it, no real community input. And so, and again, kind of as Marcus talked about, and this pressure, this kind of white lash that we've seen, then school districts under that pressure kind of really snap back to policing, right? And we've seen that here in where I live in DC with the Alexandria school district, right? Under the kind of Virginia governor's race, really got the kind of crisis that young people are experiencing, got really sensationalized, politicized in a way that was used to try to discredit what young people wanted in terms of safety and what was really happening. So we think the ultimate answer is always kind of organize, and it really takes a whole community. So it's young people, it's adult, and in some places I think it's really important to figure out how to organize teachers and educators. I think that's also been one of the decisive factors to keeping it in, because they're the ones who are calling the police and are also the ones issuing the call for the return of police. And so they have to be politicized and won over, and to be understanding the connection that you can't learn and be trying to jail students at the same time. They're diametrically opposed to one another.
Yeah, let's talk about educators and teachers. I see Zion and Sarah nodding. Zion, you gonna jump in?
Hi, so was there a question around what educators can do?
Yeah. What do you see as some of the opportunities, but also some of the challenges of working with teachers and other educators? And the kind of, Jonathan was just saying, is they play a really crucial role in all of this.
Yes. Whew. I'm really trying to take my time with this because personally, I have young folks in like my organization's programs. I'm not connected to teachers. I know, ooh, the sigh. So personally, I'm not connected to a whole bunch of educators at the moment, but I'm connected to so many students. And I feel like what I hear from students about their teachers is honestly that like their teachers are doing the best that they can. And honestly, I want to say, and this might not be like the most radical answer, but I feel like teachers like need support and they need help. I feel like teachers are barely even getting paid enough to get through this pandemic, let alone we're getting paid before this anyways. And I'm just thinking about just all the ways that educators in this country have been so disrespected by the education system. And literally so many of the educators and teachers that I do know are doing everything they can to make their students happy and make the class feel good while also being socially distanced. I know from one of my kids in particular, just having such a hard time adjusting to this seesaw about safety in school. And literally, I know the fact that like his teacher has brought so much PPE, I think that's what it's called, like COVID protection and all this stuff that is coming out of her paycheck. And I don't know, I just feel like we live in unprecedented times where educators are literally helping to shape our young folks. And I know one of my like favorite teachers was in high school, and ironically enough, she also just was able to do so much with so little. And it didn't matter what was going on, she was always able to listen to her students and make room for her students. And I feel like it's now time for the school system to move for educators. And yeah, I just feel like there's a lot more that needs to be done in that realm. And yeah, I feel like in terms of like system change, I feel like sometimes I just get lost for words because I know so many educators that just are barely getting by. I know people who are studying education who are scared out of their minds for their own futures because, you know, when is this pandemic going to end? Like nobody has serious, answers for that. So I really liked what the speaker before me was talking about by being able to use futurism to really imagine alternatives to what this scenario can look like in the future, because it does not have to be like this. And there are ways and futures out there that we can create. Like, I know a lot of folks were very hesitant and not on board for policing out of schools, but now that is a tangible future that a lot of us are actually existing in right now. So I feel like right now educators are also really being called to really create futures for themselves where they're thriving and they're able to exist without lots of suffering at the hands of the system that they're participating in, as well as their students.
I definitely want to
Okay.
echo. So go ahead, Mark.
No, you go ahead. I can go after you, please.
Yeah, I want to echo what Zion said in that, like, I think a lot of teachers are doing their best, and some of what we bump up against a little bit is having the same values as many teachers and educators, but not having the same beliefs about how to advance those values. And that's kind of where we hit a little bump up against a little bit of friction. And one of the joys of collaborating with educators is that opportunity for imagination. But the system just isn't set up for us to have the space to imagine what we want, which is unfortunate. And also just, I think the pressure, I kind of alluded to this earlier, but the pressure to implement restorative and transformative practices perfectly, not recognizing that it's not a one size fits all. You know, every year you get new students, every year students get a new teacher. The school climate is constantly changing, and there's a need for constant community building. And so I think sometimes educators get frustrated that the process is not linear and there's no specific framework that they can look to. And they're also, I think, used to looking, somebody else mentioned this earlier, but looking to outside sources like community-based orgs and consultants to tell them what the answer is, rather than like looking in, being intuitive and knowing like you're the most proximate to the students, like you're in the classroom, you can kind of get a feel for what their needs are and how to build community with them. But just there's so much like looking outside of themselves and not like feeling empowered to make those strong connections and build those relationships that are so foundational to implementing restorative and transformative practices.
Well, I agree with everything that you both said, but I also think there's another, and I believe you're being very gracious in that you're reaching out your hands to join with educators and appreciating their predicament, which is real. But I also think we have to face the other side. I think the educators have to take a very deep and hard look at what their attitudes and practices have been towards young people and their families. You know, the reality is educators did not lead the movement to end zero tolerance school discipline. In fact, local teachers unions were some of the strongest opponents when young people and parents tried to argue that we had to end this kind of exclusionary discipline. And to some extent, the same is true with police-free schools. It's not educators that took up the call for police-free schools. It isn't. It was young people who took up that call. And so I think educators who I think now are, our people learn, people change, right? But I think they have to take a hard look at, why is it that educators have not been leading that call or have opposed it, given the values that I think many educators have. I mean, people do join the teaching profession ostensibly because they do care about children and their families, but there are really deep-seated stereotypes, biases, attitudes, deficit-oriented attitudes towards young people and their families. And educators spend a lot of time, and my wife is an educator in Boston Public Schools, and she is struggling to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. And there are other teachers who are trying to do that too, but there are many other teachers who unfortunately are not, and they're perpetuating the system. And so I think that we have to have a kind of both and here. I appreciate the predicament that teachers are in. I believe that educators should be supported, but I think they should be supported in transforming the way that they are relating to our young people and their parents. And, just speaking as, I am a white male professor, but I did spend countless hours traveling around this country in living rooms and after school, listening to the stories of young people and parents who were really abused. And, this abuse, there are real people who hand out this abuse, right? It's a school to prison pipeline, but there are real people who are calling police on students. There are real people who are excluding parents. There are real people who are locking children in closets because they are seen as a discipline problem. So I just want to also challenge, I want to reach out to educators in the gracious way that you have, but I also really want to challenge them to really take a look at this and learn from young people and their parents. You know, and I'll just end with this because I'm going on a little bit, but, you know, I taught at the School of Education for many years. I'm in a lot of education circles, and we're constantly focusing on problems. We're constantly focusing on deficits. Why don't we ask the question, you know, how is it that the African-American community has been able to develop child raising, nurturing, and educational practices that have sustained young people through 400 years of white supremacy, and in many cases help people thrive and grow? I don't know how many educators who ask that question, and what can they learn from families and young people in communities who've been doing that work for 400 years?
That's I think a terrific segue. I guess I have two other questions, and then just kind of ask each of you to speak to these briefly. I guess one, Sarah, you put in there thinking about leaders, so educators who play a particular role in terms of leadership. You know, I think we talk a lot about what we wish folks would understand. I guess I would love to hear you all speak to what do you wish they would do differently? And then secondly, DeWitt asks, and I think it's so powerful, you know, this work can take its toll on folks who are organizers, educators, activists, given the state of racial injustices, the carceral state, white supremacy, and these perceptions of the police as, that they're going to address some of these the issues of quote unquote safety. All of these things are really deeply entrenched in our systems and in our society. So what gives you hope when this work feels hard? So I guess two things. One is, what do you think that educational leaders, what could they be doing differently, not just understanding or interrogating themselves, but also what would that look like in terms of how they show up in their leadership? And then what gives you hope? Jonathan, you want to get started? Oh, go ahead, Zion.
My bad. I wanted to, wow. Thank you, Mark, for that really riveting question earlier. And I think one thing I wish educators or people at large would maybe understand, faculty, etc. I think a lot of this, I keep coming back to community so much in my head, it's like insane. And I feel like even also to answer the latter question, which I'm like kind of forgetting right now. So can I get a quick reminder?
Yeah, so what do you want leaders to do and what gives you hope?
So what I want leaders to do is to Mark's, emphasis on challenge. I think, I love futurism, right? I credit myself as an Afrofuturist myself. I really believe in the power of being able to envision futures and push that forward. So I think, honestly, within the abolitionist mindset and framework, that we have to stop depending on this system in the sense that we keep asking the system to change, to improve, and to grow. And we keep getting met with so much resistance and our needs not being met in the ways that we need them to be. So I think there is an essence of, okay, well, what are the other systems that we can create and grow while we abolish this one? Because maybe just this one just is not it. And it's time to grow something else, to create something else. Why would we stay in a system where, like Mark Warren was mentioning, Black families and especially Black students are just suffering and there is little to no improvement or, it just isn't happening. So, dare to create that real new future of schooling And I think also, I think what gives me hope is that I have a huge community here in Seattle to fall back on. And one of my favorite leaders of all time, Bell Hooks, has this quote that says that healing is an act of communion, that it's not done in isolation. And I feel like that speaks so well to, I think, a lot of the mindset that a lot of teachers have, in the sense that I feel like a lot of teachers experience lots of burnout, and they might not tell somebody, they might not be able to express that pain or that frustration. I feel like a lot of teachers are going through this alone. And I think also what gives me hope is that I have a community that can fill my cups up when I'm empty. And I know that I can rely on a community member like Sierra to invite me to a panel to, you know, talk my stuff, or I can rely on Sierra to recognize me and to understand what I'm going through. And it's community members like her, family like her, that's able to help me and to move forward. And also, like, not many things happen in a vacuum. I feel like a lot of us, especially like American individualism, is just kind of boring. And I feel like a lot of us are reaching the same conclusions, that like one person can change all this stuff, but like as a community, we can do so much better and create so much more. So I think also being able to think with this futurist mindset, but with community and with a focus on the collective rather than the individual is necessary.
I'll add that Freedom Schools gives me hope. Seeing young Black folks tapping into their cultural capital, dancing, singing, moving, like learning through their bodies and through joy. And I think school leaders need to make room for that, make room for Black imagination. We know, of course, all the things that we're fighting against, as I think Mark alluded to, but what are we fighting for? We don't even know, because we're so wrapped up in all the BS, you know, and all the things that we're facing that make learning challenging. And I know I'm a learner, and I know I learn best in community. Like, I don't think about any of my learning experiences. I don't reflect back to my time in K through 12 or in undergrad. I think about like spaces like these, spaces in conversation with Zion and Rainier Beach Action Coalition. I think about other community facilitated learning spaces. So yeah, I'll, iterate again that I think leaders need to make room. Like, they're afraid of us to imagine or something. I don't know, but we definitely got it on lock. Y'all just gotta like let us talk our stuff.
All right, Mark or Jonathan?
Go ahead, Jonathan.
So we were in the eyeball stare off, not knowing. Yeah, I think the message to education leaders, I echo with a lot of the message. I think there is a challenge in being called, as Lerone Bennett has this kind of famous quote: "In times of oppression, an educator is either a revolutionary or oppressor." And I think as every day, that's the choice that educators have to make and be aware of, and organize that way. I think that they do need to organize. You do need to be involved in the teachers unions, particularly if you disagree with your teachers unions politic around police-free schools. We need you to get in there and to fight with us and alongside us. I think, you want to go grab and read Willful Defiance. I think understanding, again, the history of the thing begins to offer some solutions. And then I think, as Sierra and Zion have talked about, this kind of the making room is about giving power. Turn over school discipline to the community and see if you won't get a change. We saw that in Louisiana, right? They had they had 23 arrests, right? and police couldn't do anything, but they called in community, they called in dads, and that began to transform the school environment, right? And so we already know the answers. It's community, not cops. And I think the thing that gives me hope is the vision of a young person that I lost in 2013, George Carter III. And he has been the inspiration really behind Police Free Schools. It's been a fight to create space for his vision. And his vision was that he wanted to see schools that had mood detectors instead of metal detectors, that had strawberry gardens instead of suspension rooms. And if you can understand that is the radical imagination of Black youth, that is the safety that they want in their schools, you don't need a plan. You just need to follow and listen to young people. They will take you to where we want to go and where we all need to be.
Well, it's hard to follow Jonathan often, but let me just say, just to add on to that, you know, I spoke a lot about challenging educators, and I think power is really a question. You know, young people and parents and communities have to build power to start to shake things up. But what's going to really transform the hearts and minds of people is not power. Power can start that process. It has to be about relationships. That educators have to build new kinds of relationships with young people and their families. I know we're talking about a lot youth-led here and young people here, and I absolutely at the center. But this is really about an intergenerational family-based, you know, by which I mean all kinds of families, right? Not narrowly consumed, but a family-based, because that's where young people live and grow, in family and community. And why are schools fortresses that are isolated and separated from that, right? So power and organizing is one thing, but also new kinds of relationships that can start with the kind of listening that Jonathan and, you know, Sierra and Zion have been talking about, listening to young people, and then trying to find new ways of teaching and learning together, not in a hierarchical way of, you know, Paulo Freire's idea of banking, you know, that the teachers are just dumping knowledge, dead knowledge into the heads of young people that just alienate anyone, right? But a different way of really relating and teaching and learning together. And I see that. And what gives me hope is when I see that, when I see people doing that, and when I see you know, young people and families and educators forming these new kinds of relationships. It's happening out there. We just need to lift it up, to spread it and help it grow, which is one of the things that I hope this book will do.
Ooh, thank you so much to all of you for this amazing conversation. We have a little bit of time here. We're going to watch a spoken word, and we're not going to be able to watch the whole thing, but maybe Mark, while we're going, can you just give us the 10-second framing for what we're watching?
Sure. So this is a spoken word video done by a group called folks in a group called Sacramento Area Youth Speaks. They're part of our People's Think Tank, this larger partnership that's working to connect research to the arts and to youth-led organizing. And so I'll just let them speak for themselves in the spoken word piece.
They don't care if our babies thrive at school, long as they get by at school. Get by institutionalized racism and intergenerational oppression systems that keep prison pipelines thriving. Disguised as willful defiance, I'm trying to understand why urban schools have the highest rates of incarceration instead of culturally relevant curriculum that should be liberation. Suspensions from school feel like eternity. Strategically guide the Black and brown kids out when we truly come to school to get free. Stifle academic and social emotional education. I'm just saying, could this be racially motivated? Outcomes being primarily Black and brown youth become academically stagnated, leading to suspensions, expulsions, less school participation, stereotypes perpetuated. Is your school pedagogy, discipline, or human elevation? Discipline data from the Department of Education found that Black girls are 5 times more likely than white girls to be suspended at least once from school. This data infuriating when Black girls are 7 times more likely to receive multiple out-of-school suspensions. Where is the healing, motivation, and rebuilding? How do we stand in our confidence after it has been disciplined way? How do I come to school ready to learn when you are trying to strip my intelligence and make it seem like I am insane? Black girls are 3 times more likely to receive referrals to law enforcement when white girls are getting away with behaving the same way. And we already know what they are doing to black and brown boys. It's insane. Just check the data, it's been staying the same. I mean, steady increasing is definitely a shame. Do we want to teach black boys or do we want to lead them away to trajectories that don't lead to school or higher education degrees? Schools act like they are paid to lead them to the police when it's supposed to be a safe haven to keep youth off the streets. Expand opportunities, increase chances to succeed. Shouldn't school be focused on how to keep young people engaged and excited to be in their seats? Stop mistaking our pride for reasons for us to collide with suspensions, infractions, eventually leading to the police. We try to dismantle the school to prison pipeline. It's definitely time for us to get free.
All right, I'm sorry, we don't have time to play the entire thing tonight, but we're gonna put the link in there so everyone can watch the whole thing. And Ann O'Doherty is gonna take us to the end here.
Thank you very much, Ann. I want to say thank you to Zion Thomas, Sierra Parsons, Jonathan Stith, and Mark Warren, and to our organizer, Annie Shamaro, for putting all of this together with us. We also want to say thank you to the Corbally family. Their endowment has allowed us to have these lectures over the last few years. And also we want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up. So this is a leadership Leading Toward Justice series. We'd like to invite you to come back in March when we have Dakota Irving joining us on talking about his book, Stuck Improving. We will also have a follow-on discussion after that in April, on April 25th. And you can see a little bit more information about that here on the screen. And then after we have that session, then we also have another one that we will be hosting in May. And this is going to be taking us through a brand new book that is just coming out, Leading to Unsettling Settler Colonial Education, the Transformational Indigenous Praxis Model. And again, another format with that of having the editors will be joining us on the first session in May, and then we will have a discussion afterwards. But to give you a sense of what to expect during the February discussion, we have the 2 facilitators who are going to be talking with you right now. And so if we can get Ishmael Miller, who is a PhD student here currently at the University of Washington, and also James Blanton, who's a principal and a Danforth Educational Leadership alumnus. They're going to tell us a little bit more about that session.
How's it going, folks? This is Ishmael Miller here. Really excited to be talking with you on February 28th. We'll take some time. We'll talk through Dr. Warren's book on willful defiance. We'll do a deep dive into chapter 3. I'm really trying to discuss everything that's going on there. James?
Yeah, thank you, Ishmael. Thank you, everybody, for just the wonderful conversations tonight. Just some deep conversations. Looking forward to building on that. Ishmael, looking forward to chatting with you as well and having a good session on February 28th. So we'll see you all then.
All right, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you to our panelists, to our guests, for all of you for joining us. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in February.